everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Experience. My name is Russell Glasser, and with me we have a first-time guest on, John Loftus.
It's good to be here. It's exciting, in fact. I appreciate being invited.
Great. It's good to have you here. Now, John has 2 master's degrees in the philosophy of theology and is the author of a number of books on atheism, including a couple that we're going to be talking about today. We got How to Defend the Christian Faith. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title, and this one over here is called Unapologetic. Today is Sunday, April 2nd, 2017, and we are a live call-in, internet-based atheist TV show broadcasting from Austin, Texas, and dedicated to promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. You can catch us every Sunday live on YouTube or Ustream.tv. The official Atheist Experience is www.atheist-experience.com. You can provide feedback for the show by commenting on the official show blog at freethoughtblogs.com/AXP. You can email us at tv@atheist-community.org, or you can join the Atheist Experience official discussion group on Facebook. If you enjoy this show, you can check out our related podcast, The Nonprofits, airing on the first and third Wednesdays of every month. You can find links and more information from the Atheist Experience website, and the next Nonprofits will be recorded live this Wednesday, April 5th. And as always, the cast and crew of the Atheist Experience will be going to dinner after the show at Star of India. The address is 2900 West Anderson Lane, and we'll be arriving around 6:15 or so. I have one additional announcement to make for local people in Austin. The ACA lecture next month at the Austin History Center is going to be John Seaver from Population Connection, and he will be talking about soaring past 7 billion, population challenges for a crowded world. So that should be an interesting lecture. And on with the show. How are you today, John?
I'm doing great. It's a good sunny day here in Texas.
Yep.
And I'm loving it.
So you're on like a month-long visit here? Is that what I understand?
About 3 months. My wife is working as a contract therapist, and she's here for a few months. I'm retired. I can hang along and
cool.
Write and visit and have fun.
And you're going to be in Austin that whole time pretty much, or in and out of different cities, or what?
No, College Station is where she's stationed.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Well, I hope you're enjoying our state more so far. I think some parts are more enjoyable than others.
Yes, I enjoy it, yeah.
Before the show we were talking, and you said that those 2 master's degrees you got are in topics that you now consider to be complete nonsense.
I did say that. Sometimes I say things off the air that shouldn't be repeated on the air. You do know this, right?
My bad. But no, I mean, believe me, people will appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's like getting a degree in the characteristics and the existence of fairies, to my view now. And it did help me to produce, some arguments that I think are unique, and for that I'm very grateful. But I guess I would rather have gotten a business degree and made millions of bucks.
Well,
but,
sure,
other than that.
I mean, I guess the difference is that you don't have something like 85% of Americans believing in fairies, and so it's at least a little bit relevant to have sort of an educational grounding in something that a lot of people think, right?
Right. As an ex-minister, college professor, I just want to share what I had learned in preparation for being an apologist. Mm-hmm. And, it would be a shame if I just walked away from all of my education and said, I'm done with it now, let's go out and play. Although I did do that for about 6 years. Right. I thought to myself, okay, I'm done. But then I started thinking about it in more deeper ways, and people would ask me to explain why I no longer believe. So I wrote a book, and I thought I would be done with it then. But
little did you know.
right?
Huh?
I mean, you can't stop. I mean, because they always have additional arguments that you didn't write about. You know, well, that requires an encyclopedia. So I kept writing and kept writing and kept writing, and
also, I mean, I've talked to a number of other ex-ministers before. I mean, and it seems like, I mean, being a minister is a very particular career path, which, you know, if nothing else, prepares you for speaking very confidently about a variety of topics. Like, you know, it's a public speaking type job, and I imagine that if that's what you wind up being good at, just because you drop the thing that you used to be talking about doesn't mean that you want to stop talking.
I like to talk. Yes, that's true.
I mean, I can relate.
Well, actually, as a preacher, I was pretty good at it. People would say, you know, they'd compliment me on, you know, the sermons and stuff like that. But when I became an atheist, I realized quickly that I don't like controversy. I know it sounds strange. I get nervous. I get nervous talking about things to people who don't agree with me. And
Sure.
I
And
found
you
it
probably
strange.
didn't get a lot of people arguing with you from the pulpit.
Jesus loves you. Yeah, amen.
No, he doesn't.
Defend that claim. No, that never happened, you see. So I realized quite quickly that I was kind of nervous as a speaker, and it's kind of taken me a little bit to get out of that, I think so.
Okay, but you've obviously enjoyed writing these books a lot.
No, it was. I would rather have my teeth pulled one at a time without any drugs. So, no, it's really hard writing a book, and I look back at them and I say, you know, I didn't do this one, you know, well enough, and I want to revisit it and want to re-edit it, and all the time.
So that's how you wind up writing more books.
Yeah, you got to explain this. Okay, so I do some more, and what helps me is I blog at debunkingchristianity.com. I'm you know, the originator of that blog, and so I've had over the years people who would come on and debate me, and or others there, and I would come up with new ways of saying things that at least I hadn't said before, that would better explain my thoughts in my books as I go along, and sometimes I would even base a book on a lot of the stuff that I wrote on the blog, like The Outsider Test for Faith, and like this one, and then like that one. You won't be able to find these books online because these books are taken from my blog posts, but they are quite a bit extended from the blog posts themselves.
Right. Yeah, I've actually cited you as coining the outsider test for faith a few times in the past.
I got one person.
Yeah, I do. I mean, you know, I do a few talks for secular student groups and conferences sometimes, and like one of my favorite techniques, even though I hadn't necessarily called it that before, was basically flipping it around and, you know, flipping people's arguments around and saying, well, would you take it seriously if a Muslim was saying that to you?
Right.
Which is basically the outsider test in a nutshell, right?
It is, yeah.
So this title, How to Defend the Christian Faith, I'm presuming is kind of tongue-in-cheek. I've been looking through the chapter headings, and I've flipped through this book a bit. And I noticed that, like, in part 1, where it says preparing for the task, you've got chapter headings called, like, realize the monumental challenges, get a good education in a good field of study, and, you know, become an honest, lifelong seeker of the truth, which is all pretty good advice for anyone, right? But then when you actually get down to actually defending the Christian faith, your headings have a bit more of a bite to them, and they become things like, you have to gerrymander for God, and when all else fails, lie. What are you going for there?
Let me see what I did say. I'll start reading on page 1, and we'll get to it before too long. No,
I don't think we have time for that.
Part 1, I actually offer sincere advice to wannabe apologists. I have a unique pedigree. I have studied with some of the top defenders of 4 out of 5 different apologetical methods, and the 5th one, where I didn't actually study under a leading proponent, I had a class in.
Any names we might have heard of?
William Lane Craig.
Yeah.
John Feinberg, or Paul Feinberg, Kenneth Conser, who was the who's known as the Dean of Evangelicalism. He edited Christianity Today.
So you're saying you studied directly with William Lane Craig?
I did,
Like
yeah.
he knows you.
Oh, yeah.
And what does he think of you?
We're friends. I mean,
Okay.
I mean, in a way, except that I don't know. I kind of goaded him a little bit that maybe he doesn't like me anymore. I don't know.
Oh,
But
well, if you want to say for our very small audience, what do you think of William Lane Craig? I won't stop you, but
well, in the chapter,
if you want to be diplomatic, I'll.
In the chapter 11 here, when it says, "When all else fails, lie," I have a little section on him. You know?
Okay, I got
so,
that.
so he's not going to like that, I suppose, if he's paying attention, and he doesn't think he has to pay attention, so he's not, I guess. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not like we have a mind share of all those Americans who, who just buy into a faith, and so. You can make a lot of money by when all else fails, lie.
Now, one thing he's in a particular position as an apologist is that he's a really good debater. He can defend the indefensible like no one else. You did hear what I said. He can defend what's indefensible like no one else. And so when he's debating, you ought to view him as a lawyer. A lawyer will present the case on behalf of his client and put him in the best light as possible. It's stretching the truth if possible. I'm not accusing lawyers of that, but they want to do the best they can at making their client look good, and that's what William Lane Craig thinks that he's supposed to do with God, and he will stretch the truth and even misquote things and pull things out of context to make whatever his case he can make.
Yeah. One of the things that I've actually noticed a lot, if I had to nail down a general technique for what apologists do, they really quickly, they talk about things that should, in a way, be in the realm of empirical reality that you can, study and test. But what they seem to try to do a lot is, move the conversation away from empirical topics and move it to abstract concepts as quickly as they can. So they get, you ask, what's the evidence for God? And they'll say, oh, well, mathematically, because there is no last number or whatever. They will talk in these huge generalities and then try to apply it to specific features of the real world where, if their argument were correct, it would apply to any possible universe.
Oh, yeah, right, exactly. They lack an imagination as to what could have been.
Right.
And what they do is they take the universe as it is and they assume God is good and God made the universe good. And so therefore they do all they can to make sure that the universe is painted in good pictures and that we are the bad people and God's never to be blamed. And, it's nauseating. It's just simply nauseating.
Sure, yeah.
They're not honest people at least on a subconscious level. Their brains will not allow them to entertain the truth because there's so much writing on the delusions that they've been fed that they can't allow themselves to entertain anything but the delusion itself. They're brainwashed, they're indoctrinated. They can't. It's really hard to try to break through to them. It just really is hard. So I'd like to deal in terms of concrete examples. Like Christians will take you down the rabbit trail of, well, define an extraordinary claim. What is an extraordinary claim? And they'll bring up all kinds of odd scenarios. Or they'll say, define a miracle. Let's get into definitional apologetics and see if we can't just define this away. So you engage them. And
again, that takes you to abstract concepts. It doesn't necessarily have to be mathematical proofs. It can be, let's spend 20 minutes talking about what this word means.
So what I do is I focus on concrete examples. Okay, so maybe we're having trouble defining a miracle here. So let's talk in terms instead of a virgin who has a baby, or a levitating, 3 persons off of the Mount Transfiguration, so-called. Or let's talk in terms of concrete examples, and all of a sudden they back away. I mean, all of a sudden we can't we can't deal with this definition anymore because you don't have a definition. Well, I
Right.
don't need one. That is a miracle, right? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And go on from there.
That's where it comes in handy to be familiar with a variety of different kinds of religions, because like if you know Mormonism and you were to say something like, well, the Mormons say that Joseph Smith read all these, got personally visited by an angel who handed him some golden plates, which seem to say something that's unbiblical. What do you think about that? And it's really easy to get them to jump to, well, that's nonsense. And it's like, why? Here we go, follow me down this road, right?
Right. And it's interesting to see that the Mormons will, they have pretty good arguments against, say, evangelicals. Mm-hmm. Evangelicals have pretty good arguments against Mormons.
Exactly.
And they both have pretty good arguments against Catholics, and Catholics have pretty good arguments, against them, and on it goes until you talk about different religions.
If you want to know what's wrong with Scientology, listen to a fundamentalist Christian explain it.
Yeah. And so what I do is I simply listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
I simply read what they say, the liberals, the conservatives, the different religions, and I report back, to my readers what they've said. And they do all the work for me because none of them have any evidence for them. And so what they're doing is they're dealing in abstract concepts, like you said, without any reality behind them. And that can be seen most clearly when you see religionists debate each other. Mm-hmm. I step back. These are what you guys are saying. And you're saying, you're making the case for me.
And so sometimes the best thing to do can be to put yourself in the role of an opposing, religious mindset and just play devil's advocate. Like, for instance, if you've got a nice Christian who wants to talk about how, those Westboro Baptist Church people who just think, God hates fags, we're not like them. You say something like, well, why not? Don't they have a point? And exactly. Trying to argue against one religious position kind of invalidates a lot of the arguments that they'd be bringing up for theirs.
Oh yeah, I mean that's my point. My point is religionists debunk themselves, and they're even believers. They'll say, oh, but you're an atheist. You don't believe because you hate God. No, these are the arguments coming from other people who believe in God just as strongly as you do, but they happen to have a different take on God. You can't say that of me because I'm only telling you what they have said. And they are already believers. Well, they're not the right kind of believers. Well, show me why they're not kind of believers. I'll even challenge them to go to their websites, go to their forums, like Christians ought to go to Jehovah's Witnesses forums and say, okay, spend 4 weeks there and see how many you can convert. Go to the Catholic forum and see how many you can convert. Why? And the question is, why can't you convert them? And you'll find out, what I'm up against. You'll find out what it's like to stand back and say, you know what, as an outsider, I don't find your reasons, sufficient. There's no evidence.
So some of them will sometimes retreat to saying, well, I'm not really trying to convince everybody. It's just God really likes to see his followers put in a good effort being persecuted by unbelievers. And so, I may never convince you, but it makes me feel good. Or it makes God feel good, actually.
I like roller coasters. They make me feel good. I'll just go roller coaster riding. Then let's forget argumentation in of itself,
Right.
But if there's a God who wants disagreement, then we have to look at the kind of disagreement that we've seen among religions, and the death that is called, and the mayhem that it is causing today, and the stuff that has gone on in the past. And you have to say, is that a God that you want to believe in that's worthy of worship, that would inspire two different religions, or even within any given one of them that would, condone rape or killing of homosexuals? Or is that the kind of God you actually want to embrace? And then you kind of press them on that kind of issue as well. So
right, and I mean, according to various sites and organizations that pay attention to these numbers, it's not just two competing religions; it's tens of thousands of sects of Christianity. Which, I mean, basically what happens every time is it's like, look, there's all these sects of Christianity and they can't seem to agree on anything. So let's make a version that agrees on everything. And then it's like, oh, now we have 30,001 sects of Christianity.
Yeah.
Do you have would you say a favorite argument or Christian apologetic that you just keep coming back to over and over again?
No.
They're just not that good, huh?
No, I was asked on a Christian radio program a couple of years back, what's the best argument that you've run across from the Christian circles? And they were talking from the evangelical circles. None. No, don't you have any?
Right.
Don't you have any? No, they're all bad. I mean,
Yeah.
they just like I said here, they specialize in special pleading, they punt to possibilities, they gerrymander for God, they master the art of mischaracterization. I cannot believe
It's a lot of alliteration there.
I can't believe how often I engage Christians and they mischaracterize. They don't have the eyes and the ears to see and to hear what I'm saying. Now, I used to be on that side, so I'm doing my damnedest, to help them understand that I understand what you said, and I could say it just as well as you have said it, and even better than you can say it. And so I understand what you say. But they can't do that likewise. They can't understand. I try, but they don't have the eyes or the ears to hear. Their brain is lying to them. Their brain is specializing in lying to them, hiding the truth.
Well, turning the topic around from how Christians can convince atheists, is there any particular technique or approach that you found works really well as an atheist? And when I say works really well, I obviously don't mean converting everybody you talk to, but there must be that one thing that's 1% more effective than the other stuff, or not one thing.
For believers to talk to atheists and convince them?
For atheists to talk to Christians, because most atheists I know were once Christians. If you're talking to somebody who's religious and you want something that works better than the typical technique, how do you approach an argument?
Well,
after this, we'll go to callers.
Okay, I like the outsider test of faith, and that's treat your own religion as if you're an outsider, like you've never heard of it before.
Right.
And so then let's go in to see how exactly you look at the Mormon or the Muslim faith. How do you do that? Well, we assume that the Koran is not divine, but written by Muhammad as a man. A man wrote it. And then we look at for evidence to see if there's a divine mind behind it. Well, do that same thing with the Bible. Don't automatically assume that the Bible is written by God. Approach it as if a bunch of different people wrote it, and see if there's any divine mind behind it. That kind of thing. Sometimes
so don't start with the assumption that it's divine.
No.
See if you can work your way to the conclusion that it's divine.
Otherwise, you're special pleading, and that's why I have a whole chapter in this book called "You Must Specialize in Special Pleading." Let me just read, if I could, the first paragraph of that chapter, because I think I said it better than I'm going to say it if I don't.
Sure.
All apologetics is special pleading. If you want to be a Christian apologist, you must perfect this art. It's what you'd be taught in any college or seminary apologetics program. However, if you want to be a good Christian apologist, you must avoid doing so entirely. But if you avoided doing so entirely, you wouldn't be an apologist at all. The risk here should be clear. If you didn't special plead your case, you wouldn't be an apologist at all. That's the kind of thing you'll see in this book. It's kind of a backhanded way of talking to Christians, but I do offer some sincere advice in the first chapter, about being honest, being a lifelong seeker of truth.
Okay. Well, so we've got some callers lined up, and I was thinking that we could first take Hirad from Iran, because it seems like he has actually read Unapologetic and would like to talk about some specific points in that book. Hello, Hirad, are you on?
Hi, yes, I'm on. How are you guys?
Hi, good. How are you?
Yes, good.
Great. So, John, I read your book, but I'm still in the middle of the chapter 5. So, just taking up some points that you discussed with about your defense of the new atheists.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So,
like
what you
Richard
talk
Dawkins
about
and
is...
like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens,
Exactly.
P.Z. Myers, and others that I defended, sure.
Yeah, okay. So, one thing you pointed out, and I think you were really, really right on this point was that the method of the old atheists, comparing it to the new atheists, is really outdated. So, for example, what I mean is that if it wasn't for the new atheists, I wouldn't really be an atheist right now. I wouldn't know of people who were or who are atheists. And also, I wouldn't know of other people like you, like Graham Oppy, like Schellenberg.
Right.
Yeah, so how would you then, because you touched on the post-theism bit in your book, and you've also talked about that if we try to respond to this criticism or to their arguments for God, we have to do it over and over again because they just keep coming. And it adds credibility to theists. But you also say that in your book that you want to change minds.
Yes.
So how would you then? It seems to me to be a paradox here.
Okay.
Because,
Yes, it is. I understand. Let's see if I can put your question in terms of that others can understand, because I myself had a bit of difficulty understanding it. You like the fact that the new atheists exist because they propelled atheism into the forefront, and their modus operandi would be to stress for evidence. Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? We don't want to go into this mumble jumble of theology and philosophy in order to believe or not to believe.
Exactly.
We want the evidence. Their stress was on the evidence. P.Z. Myers' courtier's reply was based on the evidence. Where's the evidence? Otherwise we're going to treat you like the emperor with no clothes, and we're just going to laugh at you and stuff like that. So it gets a lot of people, they sit up in their seat and they say, well, where is the evidence? And all of a sudden, all of their gerrymanderings and all of their philosophical reasonings seem to be akin to discussing the height and the weight and the characteristics of Superman, or the fairies, or how fast the Superman could fly. Well, first let's have some evidence there is a Superman. Right? Okay. But what about other philosophers of religion like Graham Oppy? I really think highly of him as one of the
me too.
preeminent philosophers of religion. Well, I think you probably read what I said about that. What he's done in his latest book describing gods is to discuss the characteristics of Superman.
Yeah, I've read the book.
What he's doing in the book describing gods is he's describing the characteristics of Superman. Can he fly faster than a bullet? Can a bullet penetrate his skin? Can he?
But the point remains, though.
You're gonna have to let me answer. You're gonna have to let me answer.
Okay. Go on.
Or whether Superman can move the earth. Well, first, where is Superman? First, let's find out whether there's any evidence for God. Where is this God? Otherwise, we're just playing a game with Christians who already need our approbation. I mean, let's say it's approbation may not be a wrong word, but our encouragement. If we start taking them seriously when they start talking about things like hell and how hell can be either palatable or impalatable without looking at the evidence for hell, where is hell? And who believed it and why did they believe it? We have to look at the evidence for hell. We have to look at the evidence for God. We have to look at the evidence for Jesus. We have to look at that evidence. And if the evidence is not there, then what we're doing when we pick one version of hell or one version of Jesus or one version of God out of the mix of myriads of numbers of gods and hells and Jesuses, then what we're doing by dissecting that particular belief, we're putting more emphasis on that. We're actually saying that is the best view of God there is, or that is the best view of hell there is, or that is the best view of Jesus there is. And we're picking on that argument to discuss it because we think that's the best thing.
I agree.
But so by doing that, we've already decided among the many different views of gods and Jesus and hells, which ones have more merit. And I don't think that we should do that. Once we do that, and rather than put them all in the mix of all kinds of different views of hells and all different kinds of views of Jesus and all kinds of different views of gods, then people, religionists, actually see what's going on. They have different views because there's no evidence for them. And if the evidence doesn't convince them, I don't know that philosophical reasoning is going to do it. Now, I'm not saying that you don't do that. I'm just saying if you do it in the classroom, you should tell the truth to your students. And I'm talking mainly to atheist philosophers of religion. Tell the truth to your students.
Yeah, I've read that,
So I think the question is partly, does arguing with theists in general kind of legitimize them in a way that they weren't already legitimized in the first place.
It's the claim that John makes in his book, and I agree. What I'm saying is that how else can you change people's minds? You have no way except to engage with them.
Well,
and this engaging with them. Okay, go ahead.
Well, like for instance, does God exist? Well, you can talk about the philosophical arguments for the existence of God, the argument for reason, or the ontological.
Well, they are rubbish, but okay.
That's right. That's right. Or you can just turn to the Bible, open it up, find out about the God in the Bible, and his name is Yahweh, right? And then look at his characteristics, and look who believed in him, and find out things by looking at extra canonical literature, that he was the son of El, and that he had a wife. Otherwise, how did he have sons and daughters? How were there sons and daughters from Yahweh unless he had a wife? The wife was cut out of the Old Testament. Asherah was her name. And ask yourself, okay, now this is the God that evolved into the God I believe in, and ask yourself whether or not you believe in Yahweh. Now, if you don't believe in Yahweh, you can't believe in God. I mean, you shouldn't be able to. So you look at what the Bible has to say. You look at what science has to say. Evolution basically discredits almost all religions. And it doesn't necessarily prove all religion is wrong. If you're asking me to prove that a religion is wrong from science, you're asking too much of science. But you do see that it's very improbable that any religion is wrong, and that's good. And that's good enough.
The point that I'm making, though, is that you remember your book, Why I Became an Atheist. That was
I don't remember much about it anymore. I've had a few drinks since then.
Well, I've translated this into Persian, and it's available for download.
I remember you now, yes.
Okay.
If I can jump in and maybe address the concern you have,
okay.
I think that maybe the way to approach these arguments is to, first of all, is to maybe personalize the argument and make it clear that you are arguing with the person on their own terms, and in that way sort of conditionally accept that what they're saying is true, but make sure they get that you're taking it as seriously as, say, you might take an argument about Superman, right? It's possible to have an argument about whether Superman...
I'm not saying that we have to take it seriously. I mean, sometimes we have no choice but to do that. Okay?
Well,
so for example,
I'm saying you do have a choice.
Okay, you need to read the rest of the book first off, okay? And I'm going to ask you later. I'm going to ask you later. I'm going to give you a test, right? If you don't pass the test, then I'm going to have to flunk you, right? But once you read the whole book, you'll find out that what I'm talking about is more nuanced than that. Yes, we have to deal with versions of hell. Yes, we have to deal with versions of God. Yes, we have to deal with versions of Jesus, right? One after another if we have to. If we're going to write a scholarly book on Jesus, then we have to deal with all those versions of Jesus. Yes, we have to. But it's best done in the context where you deal with them all. You can't just pick out on, say, the traditional view of hell where there's everlasting conscious suffering.
Yeah.
You can't do that. Otherwise, if you do that, you're saying this version of hell has more merit to it such that I'm going to deal with it. But if you write a chapter on versions of hell and you deal with a bunch of them, or a book on hell, and you write a book on a bunch of them, then it puts all these versions of hell in the same context, which is where they should be. So you deal with them, yes, but only in the context of religion in general. That's why I advocate comparative religion, the anthropology of religion, and psychology of religion. As you might know this, but my listeners might know this. So
go on.
We have to deal with religion in the context, of the world religion. And if you don't do that multiculturally, then what you're doing is that you're saying my parochial religion has more merit to it than others. And I think that's what's doing us harm, because Christians themselves, if we just deal with their versions and don't talk about multiple cultural versions of religions, they tend to think that they've got the major alternative to atheism. And if they have the major alternative to atheism, all they have to do is attack atheism, and they ride high and act like they're going somewhere.
Exactly. That's the problem we have in Iran, because Muslims think that all the options are either atheism or Islam.
Right, right. So what they've got you involved in a vicious cycle. You've got to break. You've got to break if you want to get anywhere with them, and you don't want to get killed either, of course.
Hirad, I mean, I'd like to ask you something. I mean,
Okay.
I'm assuming that you don't get into these arguments very publicly. I mean, I'm not going to assume much about your personal position, but
Well, I do get in as far as I can. Like in university, for example, during question hours, they are somehow open to the questions. Not really. You have to be careful. But you can.
So, when you get in these conversations, I guess, are you mainly trying to sort of soften the position of fellow students or professors, or, in what context do you get in arguments?
I just try to instill doubt, just try to add the possibility that they can see that things can be otherwise. Because the thing is, the main difference between the West and the East, and mainly the Middle East, is that people are not used to hearing these kinds of criticism. They were, but not for a long time after the so-called golden age of Islam. So they are not used to hearing this. So they just dismiss it right out.
Yeah.
So, for example, the problem of evil is just really laughed off as this kind of silly, like, excuses.
Yeah.
That atheists.
Well, of course, if you're chopping
Just
off,
a minute. It sounds like you're running into a particular sticking point when you try to get into these arguments, because you're not sure how much conditionally to basically accept Islam or their particular arguments. Like by arguing against it, you sort of also validate it. Is that your main concern?
Exactly. And the other concern is that if I don't talk about it, if I don't criticize it, if I don't translate these books like by Dawkins or Harris or by your guests, then, or not criticize, the locally religious conditions in my country, then what can I do to make things better? So I have to start from somber.
Your position is different than the position of, say, 99% of the people who will read my book. And I didn't write about your position. I didn't write about your particular scenario. But if I were to add a chapter or a section on it, I would say that you really do need to break through to talk, when you talk about versions of hell or versions of problem of evil, you need to package them in a comparative religion sense, where you're writing about all the different versions of hell. Now, I'm not saying that's going to work. I'm not saying anything I say is actually going to work either. But I'm talking about in principle, whereas you're asking me to talk about in practice. Now, you might not be able to be a professor in the philosophy of religion classes who can actually tell your students the truth either. You might teach in Houston, Texas, for instance, and if you do that, you might get fired, or you might get banned if you tell your students that faith is irrational.
Or if you're in Iran, it could be worse.
And in Iran, Iran is worse.
I took up free will, and I was in really big trouble.
But that doesn't undermine the fact that you should try if you can. Now, if you can't, you can't, and I understand perfectly well why you can't.
I think that.
Okay, so the main point. Can I ask John a question?
Sure.
The main point is that you were so good in your book, Why I Became an Atheist, and you said before that you've become a little jaded and you moved on from projects of this kind. But the part of your book, your present book, that was concerned with the argument for the 11th century theologian and philosopher, I forgot the name of the argument, the ontological argument. You were so good at criticizing the argument and offering a really great rebuttal.
Well, thank you so much.
To it. Yeah, it's really awesome. And,
well, good. That makes you feel good.
Yeah. Well, you really deserve it, but I think you deserve much more much more popularity and much more reputation, at least on a par with Grayling, I think.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
Yeah, your works are really influential, and they proved really influential within people like me in Iran.
Well, thank you.
So the
Thanks so much.
download rate has been crazy, and I cannot say the numbers because if I say the numbers, they can check the counters, and I've stayed online for somehow a long time. So I'm risking, myself, and I need to say goodbye. But before I say this, you're so good at offering, counter apologetics. You're really good at it, and I hope you continue writing books like that. Even if you think that it's really, sometimes really a stupid subject to talk about, one can, how it is. You have an argument, you refute it, the premises change, Planting offers another one, William Lane Craig offers another one, and they all are refuted 100 times. So maybe just for those of us who are in the middle, and I see, because it was your books that changed my position to the kind of the strong atheist. And so I think if you could read that, if you could write that again, it would really change things for people like me. So I wish you could continue that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you for calling, Hirad. And
okay.
Good luck with your situation over there.
Yeah.
And well, you got a fan. Congratulations.
He and my mom make two.
Well, I hope we generate some more today. All right, so we have, it looks like Lucas in New York. How are you doing?
Good. Hello?
What's up?
Hello.
I just wanted to ask the question. My name's Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for the chat. Okay, I wanted to know why you deny God.
Yeah. By the way, I'm going to warn you that the callers think you're a troll, so I'm keeping an eye on the situation.
I know.
So
atheists tend to just censor people that disagree with their views.
Yeah,
so
we're going to take you seriously for a couple of minutes.
So what you're asking me is why I deny Allah?
Why you deny any God?
Well, I assume that you reject Allah. I mean, you don't think he exists?
Not necessarily. I don't believe Allah exists necessarily.
Okay. So let's talk about which God you believe in. Why would you bother unless you have a particular God in mind that you may be offended that you're going to take out part of your day holding online to ask the question. What kind of God do you believe in? I mean, just tell me a name. Give me a name.
Well, I don't necessarily need to give a name since the name of the show is the Atheist Experience.
Well, do you? You do believe in a God, right?
A specific one, which is?
Yes, a God, but not necessarily. I don't want to get into specific religions
the thing
because
is
I think that'll just sidetrack.
The thing is that when we talk to people on this show, we get people coming from a lot of different backgrounds who have very specific ideas about God. Are you telling me that you don't have any?
I do. I believe that God is certain things. I'm just saying I didn't want to get into a specific religion.
Well, but you can't talk about the concept of God in the abstract necessarily. Yes, I
can. If I can demonstrate that this exists, then that falsifies your position, right?
Okay, so he's using the word God as a placeholder for a concept that we don't. We have to guess at. Okay, all right.
It's sort of a catch-all. For instance, there's a very specific concept of God that lives on Mount Olympus somewhere, and physically comes down and parties with girls every so often. And I'm pretty sure that you don't believe in that. But maybe I'm jumping the gun here.
But I'm just trying to explain that the name of the show isn't the non-Muslim experience or the non-Christian experience. It's the atheist experience.
Well, here's
if I can demonstrate that any sort of God exists, right? That I don't want to get into specifics.
Why don't you tell us what any sort of God would mean first?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you the God I believe in, what I think is a God, and you can tell me if that qualifies as something that you would consider you to not believe in.
Okay.
Okay. I believe that God is transcendent,
what does that
spaceless.
mean?
Really? So I'm trying to give you a definition.
Really? What does transcendent mean?
So do you mind if I just give you my definition?
I kind of do mind, because you're defining God in terms that aren't very concrete and don't mean specific things. So I'd appreciate it.
Okay, so let's object to that afterwards. Let's object to that afterwards.
No, I know you've called a few times and it keeps going around like this, so I'm going to pass this week. Sorry.
You know, you were getting at one angle, which I appreciate. That could have gone and done effective work. I was getting at, name me a God you don't believe in, and then turning it on him. Why don't you believe in that God?
Yeah.
But he didn't let me. So.
But I mean, this goes back to what I was saying, what we were talking about at the very beginning of the show, which is that basically Christians, or not Christians, but theists, do not like to take things in the realm of the empirically definable stuff. They like to put things in terms of abstract concepts that they don't have to nail down and discuss in specific terms.
Right.
And on another week, I mean, if this wasn't someone who'd apparently called in multiple times, then I would probably pick him up. But I think some people just like to hear the sound of their own voice. Eddie here in Austin. Hey, how are you?
Hey, how you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good.
So I wanted to talk about, I'm looking at different things on, people telling me, Eddie, you need to believe in God in order for certain things to happen to you. And I'm praying and, day in and day out that great things would happen to me. And except that they don't happen. Sometimes I would be watching a basketball game and I'm praying, my favorite basketball player is Boban Marjanovic. He's a player on the Detroit Pistons. And I would say, I'm praying, please let him play. And it doesn't happen. So, I've been praying for a lot of other things lately too, and not working. I just can't find a way to, pray and believe in something that I could get so, emotionally so happy about, thinking that it could happen. God's going to listen to me. God will listen to me. Next thing you know, he just doesn't answer me. So and then I even believed in thinking that the basketball player Boban Marjanovic was even a god, and I was thinking of him as a god for a little bit. And I just said, you know what? Maybe I may turn into an atheist because I just don't see any signs.
I don't know. Have you ever tried just doing what George Carlin does and praying to Joe Pesci instead? Because that has about the same success rate, as far as I know.
I guess.
Yeah.
He's
okay. I've never done that before.
We've got a feisty group of callers today. Bye. All right. Where were we? Andrew in Minnesota. Hello.
Yeah, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Great, thanks.
Great. So my main question, I guess, the main point that I'm looking for, I work with two pretty devout Muslim gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up in topic pretty much all the time that the Koran is perfect. It's the perfect word of God.
What kind of place do you work at, if you don't mind me asking? I'm not going to ask for details, but
no problem. Honda car dealership.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Pretty diverse bunch of employees. It's pretty cool.
Sure, yeah.
Really
I mean,
friendly.
and good for them,
out.
I would say.
Oh, yeah.
So go on.
And I mean, their main point really that comes up is that the way that the, I guess, linguistics are laid out in the Quran is something that can never be replicated by human beings, which I've looked up a little bit, but I haven't really seen any good points refuting that. Obviously, I don't believe that. But
this actually sounds like a great time to apply the outsider test. So you take this if you want to.
The thing is, I know my limitations, and I don't know enough about the Muslim faith to say that that's true or that's not true. But hearing what you said isn't the same thing as presenting any evidence. You see, I have to see the evidence, or I have to know of someone who has seen that kind of evidence. But everything I've seen about the Muslim faith, everything I've seen about any faith at all, is that it's something concocted, created, originated by people who needed to believe or control others.
I borrowed heavily from other religions.
What's that?
Borrowed heavily.
I always make the point to them, yes, most of it's borrowed heavily, and they try to use that as the point that it backs it up somehow.
Yeah. And I think it's a good policy to be honest and say that you don't know that much about Islam, including, when you are talking directly to Muslims. But the problem is, like, if you don't know something about Islam, it seems like it's up to the people who are trying to talk you into being a Muslim to convince you, basically, or to present this information in a way that is persuasive.
Right.
And it's perfectly all right to just, to just listen to these arguments and say, I don't know, you could flip through a couple of passages of the Quran. I have. It's not that good writing, personally. I mean,
well, of course, you have to speak the original language.
Oh,
to
sure.
absorb the text,
Whatever that take a lot of effort.
Language.
That'd take a lot of effort to determine the truth or the falsity of that claim, but there'd be some people who could. What I would do is I would ask the person, and I do this with Christians all the time, they'll email me and they'll say, have you ever heard this argument? And once in a while they surprise me with an argument I hadn't considered because it had some detail that was left out of other arguments, and I'll say, oh no, I really hadn't considered this before. And they'll say, well, what do you think of it? And I'll ask it, is this why you believe? Is this the reason, is this the argument that if I were to debunk it, would convince you that your religion is false? No, this is not why I believe. Well, why do you believe? Let's talk about that. It's about talking in terms of concrete examples.
Sure, yeah.
Why do you believe? You don't believe because of this argument, and the Muslim who has produced that argument for you didn't believe because of that argument. What you want to do is, if you don't know the specifics, which I don't in this case, when it comes to the Koran, I would simply say, why do you believe? Tell me the real reasons why you believe. And usually it comes down to, I was raised that way. Now, once that is out on the boards, I usually say something like this. Now, given the proliferation of religions around the world that are taught on mama's knee, we know that they all can't be true. In fact, given the numbers of them, we know that most of them are false. And so you have to agree with me that learning your religion on mama's knee is a notoriously bad way to learn a religion by the odds alone.
Although you're not going to get a theist admitting that the reason they believe is because that's what they learned as kids.
Right. You have to
Well, I've actually come close with both of them. One's from Egypt, one's from Somalia, and they both fully admit that that's what they were raised with. That's what they brought up. And I asked, well, would you believe the Quran was perfect if you had read it or hadn't read it until this point in your life? Would you just now read it and immediately go, oh, that's a perfectly written book? And I think it kind of stuck, but I mean, obviously they weren't like instantly.
Here's a question that occurs to me, which is that these are guys who have lived in both America and, you said, Egypt for one of them, right?
Correct.
And I think one line of questioning that might yield some interesting results is saying, you've lived in these two places. Isn't it weird how the religion that a person believes in seems to map so strongly to their physical location, that they just happen to believe exactly the same things as most other people around them? And see what kind of reaction that gets, because, they must feel very pressed to defend their faith, specifically because they run into almost nobody in their day-to-day lives who also believes in Islam. And that's kind of unusual if it's just objective truth, isn't
We're
it?
we're living in a global society now. Internet can take you around the world in a split second, and there's nobody who could be totally ignorant about the fact that so many people believe differently. And so, if you can get someone to say, "Yes, I was raised to believe in a country," then you can use what Peter Boghossian talks about as a Socratic method, where you're talking in terms of, well, how sure can you be that you were raised correctly? And take them through the kinds of arguments that street epistemologists would do, and then try one by one lead that person to say, well, you know what? If I were born in, say, Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is where I was born, I would probably be, a Christian of some kind, which I was. My mom was a Protestant, my dad was a Catholic, and since she had to sign on one way or the other, when we were born, we became Catholics until such time as his parents died, and when his parents died, then she could do whatever she wanted. She started going to a Protestant church, and all of a sudden I started going to that Protestant church. I became a minister in that Protestant church. So talk about the kinds of things that why don't you believe what you would have been raised to be somewhere else? And then press upon them the outsider test of faith afterward, or in the process. And but the argument he gave you is not the reason he believed. We have to get beyond trying to answer these arguments. Yes, there are people who can.
An excellent point. I don't want to take up any more of you guys' time. That was really an excellent point. I'll take that to heart.
All right.
Thank you guys so much for the show, and really, really appreciate what you guys do.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for calling, Andrew. See you later. And also, just to finish another thought that I started earlier, it seems to me that the question of whether the Quran is perfect, so to speak, that's not really a matter of fact. It's a matter of literary criticism. And it can be intimidating to be talking to somebody who asserts with absolute confidence that their opinion about something is the correct and only opinion. But there's nothing wrong with meeting an opinion with another opinion. A lot of people like the movie Interstellar, including Neil deGrasse Tyson. I thought it was kind of crappy. Bring on the hate mail. But that was on my mind because I was arguing about it with somebody yesterday. But the opinion that Interstellar is good or bad is not entirely a true or false question, any more than the question that the Quran is a perfect or wonderfully written book. A lot of that comes down to what do you think of it? And there's nothing wrong with just saying, no, it's not, without having any supporting arguments.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to know what a perfectly written book in Arabic would be, and
right.
That's just too much effort for me. So I leave it to someone else to look at that, and it's not going to be me.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. I'm just going to go with the person who's been waiting the longest. Sorry about that, Wally in Maryland, but you are on the Atheist Experience with me and John Loftus. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you and John doing,
Good.
Russell?
Pretty good.
Good.
All right. Well, I wanted to touch on a couple things before I actually got to the subject that I was calling about. One of the things was the comment section. Somebody said there seems to be a strong correlation between the chat being enabled and troll callers.
Yes.
I'm inclined to agree. So I don't know what they were implying by that. That maybe you should turn off the chat being enabled while you guys are having this.
Well, I think the chat being enabled, like specifically, there are some YouTube live discussions going on that we've been experimenting with to see how that turns out. And
okay.
I appreciate your input that that this might be driving some of the troll callers. It's always kind of a tricky balancing act when you're dealing with certain kinds of feedback to figure out if providing a space for people to talk without moderation is better overall than moderating it and basically possibly having a higher caliber of discussion. But it's something we're checking out. We'll keep an eye on it.
Okay. All right. The other thing that I wanted to address before I got to my main point was I saw something that was actually kind of humorous. It said today's co-host is Crocodile Dundee. So thank you for joining us, Mick.
Yeah, nice hat, by the way.
It's a mixture. It's a mix between a cowboy hat and an Aussie hat. I love it. So
If
I like
you
it
are
too,
just
so- and I
listening to
love
the
Crocodile Dundee.
podcast, for listeners who are only listening to the podcast, you should pause it and go to YouTube and check out John's hat. I think it's kind of awesome, actually.
All right.
I love hats. I've got 20, 30 of them.
Of course,
Yeah.
to get the real Crocodile Dundee effect, you also have to bring a gigantic knife into the studio. But I think thanks for not doing that. What do you do? No, put that away.
This isn't a gigantic one.
Yeah, that's not a knife.
Oh,
This is a knife.
It is. And I've saw the movie. I know what you're talking
Right.
about.
Okay, go on.
All right, so I guess I'll get on to the main point now. I've been a closet atheist for or I was a closet atheist for as long as I could remember. For the most part, I'm pretty open about it now. When I was younger, like the more I went to church, the less I kind of understood about what they were preaching about God, and I kind of started to like ask the question, like why would somebody who is perfect create something that was imperfect and then punish the people he created for acting in a way that was consistent with his model? Like, that just didn't make any sense to me. And that's kind of been my mode of thinking for a while. And I've actually been binge watching the Atheist Experience for, I want to say, like, a couple weeks now. I used to
we
watch
appreciate
like, on and off. I appreciate you guys doing the show. So, like I was saying, the whole concept defied understanding for me, and I never bought into the whole God works in mysterious ways bullshit. Or sorry, excuse my French. It's just, anyways, the concept of God that was pushed on me, anyways. Go ahead.
Well, as a former teacher, I teach online classes too now, but as a instructor, I never flunked a whole class of students. But what would you think of a professor who would flunk every class of students he ever taught? Well, that's what we're getting with the Adam and Eve experience. Because if there was someone alive today who would not have sinned in the Garden of Eden, then there's someone alive today who's being punished for something he never would have done.
Exactly.
But if on the other hand everyone would have failed the test, then the test isn't fair. So it's obviously skewed. There's something wrong with the test itself. So in either sense and in either direction, you get yourself into nonsense. Just like you said, it's nonsensical. It's nothing but a myth, trying to explain why people were where they were and why people were afraid of snakes, why they didn't live in a paradise, but they lived as desert nomads, and so they concocted these stories. They told them at night, and they didn't know where they came from, so they must have came from here, they came from there, and these are nothing but myths. They're used to solidify a group of people under a common theme.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Like any test with an attrition rate of 100% is not a good test at all. Like I'm in the Army, and like if there's a test with an attrition rate that's too high or too low, then they reassess the test itself. But the thing is that like if God's a perfect being, then
I mean,
then
especially
it wouldn't
because
need reassessment. It would just be perfect on the first try. It makes absolutely no sense.
yeah, the point of passing a test in the Army is not to see who's capable of passing your arbitrary test. It's to actually get a military force in actual fighting form. And if you don't pass anybody, like it's better to have at least the best of a bunch of really bad soldiers than no soldiers at all. I'm assuming. I'm not a military tactician. But it seems like a professor who, like John said, would fail an entire class of his students has really failed to teach his students anything. So that kind of seems to reflect pretty badly on the professor too.
Yes. Okay, so all right, I'm going to move on to the next part of this, which is so I kind of laid the groundwork for my life experience in this particular area anyways. My father just recently went to rehab. He just got out in like the beginning of March. And since he's gotten out, we've had a really close relationship. I want to say like for pretty much all of my life. The only exception being like during high school when he relapsed when I was in high school. But so since he's been out of rehab the most recent time, Most of our, like, I want to say more conversations than normal have been kind of colored by religion. Like, and he's somebody who didn't, I want to say, find religion until like he was in his 30s, when he was getting ready to go into AA for the first time. And it seems like it's been a really significant part for him, for his recovery anyways. So it's not something that I kind of wanted to just shut down. And I know I could, not necessarily because like I'm that confident in myself, but he's a smart person, and the tools that he imbued me with when I was younger, the things that he taught me are the things that ended up leading to me rejecting faith altogether, publicly anyways. And it just, I feel like if I were to push the point more and more, eventually he would come around, kind of like how Matt did. Matt's a smart person, and Matt eventually came to question his beliefs. It boiled down mostly to critical analysis of certain parts of your belief. Like, he wanted to prove some of the things that he believed to be true. And I feel like if I could push my dad in that direction, then that would kind of lead to the same end result, or a similar one anyways. For a couple of reasons, I haven't tried to do that. Like I said, for one, it seems to have been like a pretty important part for his recovery, and I don't want to take that away from him, especially considering, like, he's doing a good job now. And he seems to be in a good place mentally. The only concern that it brings up for me is that, like I said, a lot of our recent conversations have been colored by religion, and I've tried explaining to him several times, because he keeps trying to push the issue, that I'm not asserting the non-existence of God. I'm just unconvinced of his existence due largely to lack of evidence. There's not enough evidence to convince me that he does exist. I'm not saying he doesn't exist. So, and I've tried assuring him several times. I've tried to believe. I've tried to conform to this whole worldview that there is a God. I've tried to have faith. It never took. It really never did.
Are you wondering what's the best way to have a conversation with your dad, or wondering
yes.
wondering whether or not you should push the issue of atheism, or what?
A little bit of both, actually. What's the best way to approach the conversation, and should I kind of push that conversation of
Right. Well, I mean, first of all, you mentioned that your dad's really smart, and you think that if you could argue with him the right way, then he would probably give up his religion. And so I want to manage your expectations a little bit, because it's perfectly reasonable and laudable to have a frank discussion about your opinions and beliefs with your father, and try to talk him around to your way of thinking. But also, I mean, I just wanted to warn you that it's possible for people to change their religions, but it's kind of rare. And so when I say managing your expectations, I just want to make sure that you don't feel too personally invested, that you'll be completely disappointed and hopeless if he doesn't change his mind, because it's a difficult battle to fight. You know what I mean?
I'm not. Yeah, I get what you mean. I'm not too personally invested. It's just it was more of an aside that I think that would be the end result in a conversation where I would kind of assert the point of atheism and for him to kind of.
So first, I mean, I think you're also worried that if you did manage to change his mind, that he would blow his recovery, and I doubt it. Okay, what do you think?
Well, the way I would probably handle him, I have a mother and a brother and his family. They're very religious, and I don't talk to them about it. I just don't. If they know I'm an atheist, of course, and every Christmas I'll give them my new book. I'll say to my brother, I'll say,
I bet they appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't really care if you read it, Tom, but use it as a doorstop. I'm just pretty proud, kind of happy that I did this, and I want you to know that I'm not the loser you thought I was when we were growing up together. So I don't do it. But they know I am an atheist, and if a question comes up, I will answer it. I'm not afraid of answering questions. In your case, if you want to introduce something like that, if you have not yet talked to them, or if they don't know too much about your atheism, then I suggest that you just simply ask questions. How do you? Two questions, important questions. How do you know that? And what do you mean?
Okay.
Although I should probably do it in reverse order. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by God? We did that earlier. What do you mean by the Bible? If it's inspired, how so is it inspired? How much did men write it? How come they have different grammar? They use different words, things like that. And how come there are forgeries in it too? I mean, no, you got to get there. But what do you mean by that? And then how do you know? Two questions that's, Socrates would ask over and over against the people that would claim to know something with certainty. And, engage him.
It's a common theme on the show, too.
It is. Engage him in a little street epistemology. Look that up online. Read a book by Peter Bachosian.
Check out our show where we talk to
one more time? I'm gonna write it down.
Anthony Magnabosco.
Yes, Anthony, right. Simply create doubt. I like to do this, and I'll do this all the time with people. They will suggest something, and I'll say, that doesn't sound too believable to me, whatever it is. And I'll say, let's test that hypothesis. I'll say that all the time, or we need to test that hypothesis. And if we can't, then I say, someone's got to test it, I think like a scientist, and how would a scientist think? And it'd be something testable. What's the scientist looking for? Well, he's looking for evidence. He or she is looking for evidence. So I instill those kind of values, the intellectual values of evidence seeking and questioning, and sometimes that's all you can get, and sometimes it works, sometimes it won't. It depends on how receptive he would be to that sort of initial questioning.
Okay, I guess I kind of understand what you're saying. The material that you were saying that I should go read, I didn't quite catch it the first time. Can you give it one more time so I can write it down?
Well, Peter Bachosian's book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Now, he didn't create that title. He's been maligned for that because his publisher did. And publishers, that's what they do. They sell books with titles. I had my own disputes with some of my publishers, and I won one argument and I lost another one as far as the title of a book goes. But it's called A Manual for Creating Atheists. And what he really is doing is he's trying to instill within people the Socratic method. And there are people out there who have who are certain about their faith, and what you need to do is you need to get them to be doubters. And that's the only honest position to be when it comes to these sorts of things. And how a degree of doubt you have depends on the lack of evidence, and on it goes.
Right. And I mean, I also just want to reiterate that if your main worry is better not try to talk my dad out of belief because he might backslide into alcoholism, I doubt it. I think that like some of these sobriety programs, especially Alcoholics Anonymous, is especially bad about this. Like, push people to accept a higher power as the basis for their drying out, or whatever they would refer to it as. But I mean, that's just propaganda on some level, and I think that coming to grips with the fact that addiction is a dangerous problem that needs to be dealt with head on, there's no real evidence that keeping a higher power in mind has any particular beneficial effect. There are secular sobriety programs. I mean, secular sobriety is actually the name of a specific organization. And if that much of your dad's identity now hinges around his belief in God, then odds are he's not going to give that up anyway. And if not, then you and he can probably talk and come to a better solution about reasonable, rational reasons to to break his addiction. So I think just be honest with your dad, and also don't put too much of your ego into the idea that you are going to get him to any specific position.
Okay. One more thing, I think.
All right. Make it quick.
Okay, make it as quick as possible. There's been kind of like a surge in a lot of flat earther claims. I didn't see anything in the Talk Origins archive or on Iron Chariots. It was kind of like a cursory glance of those two particular sources. Do you know of any sort of like a compiled list of claims for flat earthers that I could use as a source material for
off the
refutations?
top of my head, because I've never really needed one. Like, that's one that's so out there that it is just not within the realm of my common experience to have to deal with flat earthers. I don't know
if
if
it seems to be becoming increasingly prevalent, which is kind of scary.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes, you have to bear in mind that the way people interact with each other on the internet, sometimes it can feel like a particular belief is up and coming, but that's really because they're just running into it a whole bunch. But it's very selective because, your experience running into these people could be a very, very, very tiny slice of the population. So, it's kind of anecdotal to say it's on the rise. I'm not aware of any particular resurgence of that belief.
Okay, well let me rephrase that. In my own circle or in my locality, there seems to be more and more people that are either subscribing to it ironically or unironically. But either way, and I do take into account the fact that some people can just be pose, and it's generally very easy to differentiate the trolls from people who are just actually subscribe to this absurd claim that the Earth is flat.
Yeah, when you've got something as ridiculous as believing that the Earth is flat in this age of satellite photos, and for God's sake, satellite phones, which I mean, seriously, you have information, you have cable TV, or not cable TV, but people have satellite. There's so many different kinds of communication that rely on the fact that there are objects going around the Earth in space.
I'm a satellite controller too.
Yeah. It's hard to take that stuff seriously. And depending on what kind of person you're talking to, you may not want to do them the courtesy of taking them all that seriously and saying, well, that's just bullshit, and not talking to them. Because, what's the risk if you just ignore this person? That they're going to go around and increase the number of people believing in flat earthism? I doubt it.
I guess there's more power given to them if you kind of give them a platform or just kind of acknowledge it. I get what you're saying then.
But that said, it can be fun practice for the experience of arguing in general.
Sometimes the only reason you argue something is because it's fun. You like to argue. In that case, I wouldn't.
I do like to argue, so.
Yeah, and if the argument entertains you and also it gives you some practice in rhetorical techniques, then go for it.
Okay. All right, well, that's pretty much the end of everything that I wanted to talk about. I'm not going to burn up any more of your guys' time. Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing the show.
Thanks for calling.
We do have a couple more people who have been on the line for the entire show and a little more. But, well, okay, I'll tell you what. I used to do a thing called the lightning round where I just burned through some people. I'm going to give Q a couple minutes. Maybe I'm not. Is your name Q in New York?
Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Good.
You've got like 30 seconds to convince me that I really want to talk to you. What's up?
First I just wanted to say I'm an atheist. Me and my fiance, we're both black atheists in New York. We're big fans of the show, and you guys were a big help in our transition. Basically, I wanted to bring up, I conducted a small experiment for Black and Latino people because I wanted to see how many of them I had to go through before I got to something like an agnostic or an atheist. I also wanted to see if I could find some kind of reason why they gravitate more towards religion and hold on to that. So I've been doing this for about 4 years, and I've come across like one black atheist, one Latino atheists.
So I'm sorry, but we're
not.
close to the end of the show, so I'm going to have to hurry you along a little bit. Do you have a specific question?
No real questions per se. I'm sorry. I was unprepared for this, but
I'm sorry. I mean, I know I'm probably coming across as rude, but I mean, so you're saying that your observation is like specifically about the Black and Latino culture, that what they have a higher.
I find that a lot of them tend to focus more on their everyday lives than exactly what they believe in affects their everyday lives. You know, they're just more concerned with the things in front of them instead of verifying.
Well, that's probably good, right?
No, they're not looking for the right answer. What I'm saying is they just like, oh, my light bill. Oh, got to go to work.
Okay. Well, you know, some people have a tough time and don't necessarily have the time to deal with very complicated questions when they are dealing with where their next meal is coming from or something.
Correct. I guess that. What else have I found? A lot of them aren't even aware of certain things that are out there. Like part of my experience, my question.
I think your line's fading in and out a little too much, so we're going to drop you. And also, sorry we're so pressed for time, but try again some other time. And we're going to, let's see, we've got 9 minutes left in the show, and I just want to remind local people that after the show we'll be heading for Star of India, including John, I assume. Okay, so if you want to come and hang out and talk and have some tasty food, then come on over, and we're going to talk to Matthew in Houston.
Hello.
Hi.
Real quick. Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good.
I was just wondering, like, what kind of epistemology John Loftus uses when he assesses evidence for Christianity?
Well, if you want to talk about like empiricism versus rationalism or rational empiricism and what that might entail, you know, you can ask somebody brighter than I am on
Hey,
that.
I'm right here. No, just kidding.
I did, however, do a lot of research in those areas when I was in seminary and in my PhD program, but that was like 20 years ago. What I would rather do is just simply say, where's the evidence for the resurrection? Where's the evidence for the virgin birth? Where's the evidence for people levitating off of the ground? Is that fair? Do I have to know about those sorts of things in order to say I don't see the evidence for that?
No, yeah. If you don't see it, you don't see it. But when you're presented with evidence, quote unquote evidence, I guess you could say, is there like certain types of evidence that you think are inferior to other kinds?
Yeah. The worst kind of evidence is negative evidence. Negative evidence is the lack of an explanation for a phenomena. Like, for instance, it's considered evidence by Christians that there is a creator whenever there's a gap where science can't explain. That's the worst kind of evidence. In fact, it's no evidence at all. It's to say, okay, we can't explain this, so therefore God. And then what they do is they insert their God, you know, Yahweh, not Allah, apparently, you know, and not the Hindu God or some other God, and certainly not a dead religion's God, because dead religion's God, they must have died for a reason, you see. They didn't just all of a sudden die for, you know, no reason at all. So
you never know. Maybe one of those religions is right, and now nobody knows the true nature of God.
I hope I didn't offend you, sir, but that's the way I think about that.
So, like, you're kind of privy towards empirical, repeatable kind of evidences, and there's really no other kind, you think?
Well, no, I'm not opposed to rationalism. You know, I think there's some. I've seen some philosophers argue on behalf of rationalism, but I think rationalism is basically it's just too religious for me. It's too supernaturalistic for me to think that all is reason.
Yeah, so when it comes to quality of different kinds of evidence, like there are different fields that approach evidence in different ways. Like, for instance, a scientist might have some very specific and extremely high standards for concluding that something is true. There's also legal standards of evidence, which tend to be a lot more circumstantial. I mean, if you find a bloody knife next to a victim with some fingerprints all over it, technically it doesn't prove that the guy whose fingerprints it is actually committed a murder, but the evidence can be more or less solid based on the level of detail that it approaches. One of the things that happened in American law specifically a long time ago was that after the Salem witch trials, there was this long discussion about whether spectral evidence could be allowed. Basically, people saying that that they experience supernatural things like in a dream, and whereas that spectral evidence used to be considered sufficient reason for indicting someone for the crime of witchcraft, now we don't take it seriously at all. Like, our legal system has absolutely no use for people giving unverifiable supernatural testimony. Now, does that mean that supernatural things could not happen? No, it doesn't mean that in a broad sense, but it also means that because you can't expect two people to experience those things the same way, it's our policy not to convict people based on something where the evidence is that subjective. And so that's what we mean when we talk about, like, whether a claim is more or less extraordinary, let's say.
Another kind of evidence that I think is poor is intersubjectivity evidence. That is, feelings. You have a warm, bosoming feeling in your inside, and so you think, well, that's God. What that is simply a good, warm feeling. It's not anything else but a good, warm feeling. A warm feeling is a warm feeling is a warm feeling.
And I'm all for warm feelings.
A subjective experience is no more evidence for anything else but that you had a subjective experience. There's nothing objective about it. That's why it's called a subjective experience. And I don't buy it. And since so many people have these subjective feelings that they've experienced God, and these gods are all different, and they all have different commands, and they all have different scriptures, they're notoriously unreliable. Just as Mama and her on her knees is notoriously unreliable to get at the truth about religion and which one is true if there is one.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a difference between being justified and having evidence for something, or being justified and something being true? Like, could you have justified false beliefs?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
You can't have.
I think John and I are going to duke it out now.
You can't have rationally justified false beliefs. No.
Well, I mean, it depends
That's
on.
what it means. That's what it means.
It depends, because I wouldn't say that something can be justified but not be absolutely perfectly justified, which I think, like, all
degrees of
all
evidence,
the things that we experience
degrees of
are kind of
probability.
subjective.
Degrees of probability, right?
Right.
High
yeah.
five.
Okay.
All right.
So you can have a great deal of confidence in something. You can have a 95% certainty that something is going to happen, but it could still not happen because that 5% is not 0%. And I think that people sometimes don't appreciate that about probability and just assume that a 95% means, yeah, it's true.
But you should always go with the probabilities, even if they end up being wrong.
I agree with you there. So we'll do another high five later.
Okay. Do you think the person?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fine.
I gotta go. I'm sorry.
Well,
Do
actually,
you think the person with the warm? Oh, sorry.
we're about out of time. So if you want to do a concluding thought.
No, it's just I appreciate talking to you guys. I was about to get into justification and epistemology. I like it a lot. Nice talking with you guys, though. Have a good day.
I totally invite you to call back next week. I look forward to, or maybe Matt looks forward to having more of this conversation with you.
Just look up the
Yes.
Getier's paradox, and then you look into the idea of rational justification, and you probably already are aware of it. The Getier's paradox.
Okay.
That's it.
John, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
All right.
I'm honored. I appreciate it very much.
Cool. And we'll see you at Star of India. You can watch the show next week or any Sunday. See you later. This is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. You know, The Atheist Experience is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of viewers like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values that you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.